Lenhart and I are going to present the tentative 2018-19 budget. Obviously, the board members have a lot of information in their binders. We added some more today based on some questions, but for the public's benefit, this is the first of a series of steps before we actually get to an approved budget for the 18-19 school year. I do want to highlight the members of the Finance Committee because what you see in a 10 or 20-minute presentation and discussion is the end result of many months of work, and I'll go through that timeline in a second. The Finance Committee meets for about 2 hours each time, where our other committees meet for about 45 to 60 minutes each time. Mrs. Frazier-Mill is the chairperson of the Finance Committee. Other members listed there as well. So there's a lot that goes into getting to a place where we can recommend a budget for the board to adopt at this meeting. That timeline takes about half of the school year, so it's a long process to come to a budget. Starting back in September, the vast majority of the work that you see listed there that takes place behind the scenes is Mrs. Lenhart's to oversee. A huge amount of time and effort to gather the information from the administrative team, refine the process, and bring it to a committee level where we make preliminary budget decisions and ongoing discussions. I listed there the April 24th date. That is the scheduled, that's a Tuesday meeting, specifically because of the timeline from the state for adopting a final budget. So that is 2 meetings from now where we expect to come back with the final recommendation. This budget, from a big picture standpoint, I wanted to highlight a few things that it does. So we get into the nuts and bolts of how much it costs to the taxpayer and everything else, but I did want to highlight some big picture items. It does provide funding that the board can allocate for security priorities. It supports the implementation of the new master schedule the board approved last month at the Warren Middle School. It dedicates, for the first time, at least in recent memory, operating expense dollars to the capital reserve that Mr. Samjian was just talking about. It increases our ability to provide mental health supports to students by making full-time a person who is dedicated to that role here at the middle school. It meets the demands of negotiated salary and benefits increases. We went through negotiations for this year. It meets the demands of those contractual increases and fixed operational costs. So one of the questions that often comes up is, if there are fewer students, why does the budget go up? Well, there are costs that are outside of a per pupil kind of expenditure. It costs money to keep the lights on. It costs money to make sure the facilities are operating. And salary and benefits especially, go up at a far higher rate than the tax levy increases would allow for. It expands enrichment opportunities for students with increased field trip opportunities, increased after-school activities. It invests in the classroom learning environments. We talked extensively about those over several meetings. There is money in the budget to expand that experience. Reflects new revenues. Ms. Lenhart will go into those in specific detail in a little bit, but from banking and our new aftercare provider. And it continues what has been a long-term process of making sure that our vehicles are replaced on a regular basis, our technology is replaced on a regular basis, and that we're not leaving those things for a big one-time purchase just when something goes wrong. It also continues what has been a tradition of careful fiscal management of the taxpayer dollar in the community. The budget that we're recommending does not go to the 2% tax levy cap, as it has not over the course of most of recent memory. You can see the numbers there. 2% back in 14-15. The budget we're presenting tonight is a 1.51% tax levy increase. We are not recommending a budget that uses any of the allowable exceptions for health benefits waivers or using bank cap. I did want to mention, because this was in the news a lot last week, that there was increased state aid. That was kind of a surprise to us when we got it. It allowed us to bring the tax levy cap down a bit from where we were at the last Finance Committee meeting. Our state aid went up by about $185,000 from last year to this year. But this chart shows the history of state aid in Warren Township. And I want to mention that, like everybody else in the state, we're still below the state aid numbers that we were at back in the late 2009-10 time frame. So there was a year, fortunately, nobody in this room was on this board at the time when it happened, but there was a year in 2010-11 where most districts lost nearly all their state aid, and we've been gradually increasing since then. So it is nice that we have $185,000 more state aid than last year, but we're still below where we were even 10 years ago. Again, the proposed budget does not use banked cap, so that means that basically it works on a 3-year rolling basis. So the 2015-16 bank cap will expire, and we will create new bank cap by not having gone to the 2% tax levy cap in the current year. And it does adjust staffing levels to match these declining enrollment figures. So the chart on the left, when you present it this way, it sometimes has a different impact than just seeing numbers on a chart. Our elementary enrollment has gone down consistently over the last several years and will continue to go down next year, as does our middle school student enrollment. This budget has a grand total of somewhere around 5 fewer staff positions than the existing budget. So we do keep adjusting the budget to reflect staffing, and that is a process that has been going on for a few years here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lenhart and move the lanyard so that the camera will follow her. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just go into a little bit of a further detail and a little bit more of the financial information. So what specifically does this budget reflect? It reflects the district's implementation of filling in some gaps on the district security cameras that are within our buildings. We did an initial implementation, and then upon review, once you put it in, you find some things that you want to do a little bit differently. It reflects an ongoing movement within our special education department to be able to service more of our students in the least restrictive environment right here in the district. We have a diminishing expense on the out-of-district tuition line. We are replenishing the district's transportation fleet this year. We only needed to replace 1 bus. It dedicates, as Dr. Mingle mentioned, a deposit to capital reserve. The biggest nut that the district has to handle when it comes to the budget, so with a 2% tax levy increase cap, if everything grew 2%, you'd be okay, but right off the bat, the health benefits are projected to grow 15%, and that 15% growth is on one of the district's largest expense lines to begin with. It does budget for additional furniture purchasing, as Dr. Mingle had mentioned, allows for flexibility for the board as they review security options. It renews the district's transportation contract below the state approved level. So the state approved a renewal rate of a little over 1.5, 1.51 to be exact. We came in a little lower, and it will include some purchasing on behalf of our transportation vendor for some security upgrades. And then we continue to sustain funding for the district's security program compliance manager, otherwise known as Mr. Ron Berry. Okay, so in any budget, revenue has to equal expenses, right? In a school district, you have to present a balanced budget. How do we help to meet this balanced budget requirement? Well, one is that we did change financial institutions in April of 2017, so that affected a little bit of the end of the 16-17 budget, but we're really seeing the benefits of that right now. I can't say enough about the positive effect of that change. The change to the aftercare provider does have a financial incentive to the district. We are seeing an increase in tuition monies paid based on the district's summer fund program, which has grown dramatically in the last couple of years. The preschool program has also expanded, some of which those positions in those classrooms are tuition generating. Our transportation coordinator works very hard to provide services to other districts when it works to our benefit, and therefore can be a revenue generator for the district. And as we all know by now, last Thursday we found out that we received state aid increase in the amount of $185,000. So yes, that did help. So what is the budget? Well, the budget is really a variety of numbers, and the one I would use to compare here is that the 17-18 budget started at just about $42 million. By the end of the year, the 17-18 budget is almost $43.5 million. Okay, and it can go up by, those of you who have been on the board would know this, the budget that the board approved actually never goes into effect. July 1st, that budget is already outdated because you roll over the prior year encumbrances, which also bring over the monies associated with those purchase orders. And then you can There are certain monies that come so late in the year that you're allowed to use them to actually increase the budget in the following year. So you start out with the 17-18 budget or any budget that the Board of Education approves, and then it gets mitigated throughout the year. And it just so happens in the 17-18 year, it got mitigated by a little under $1.5 million. We're starting the 18-19 budget year at $42.7 million. Where does the money go? I don't think it's anyone's surprise if I tell you that the money goes mostly to contractual salaries. So that's not our coaching stipends. That's not the monies that people get paid for professional development to give workshops. That are just the contractual salaries of our staff. If you add to that benefits, now benefits are not just health benefits. Everyone tends to make that assumption. The way that a budget is set up is benefits are quite a fair amount of items, one of which would be for our non-certificated staff. I think you all know this. Your Social Security is part employer, part employee. So benefits actually per the state's chart of accounts also includes the employer part of Social Security for non-certificated staff. It includes workman's compensation insurance, which we are required as a district. So that 22% is not just our health benefits, although by far health benefits takes up the lion's share of it. There's transportation for our non-salary expenses. So some of that goes to the Dealman enterprise. Some of it goes to some upkeep of our buses and fleets. Buildings and grounds and security, out of district tuition. Other non-salary expenses such as supplies and equipment. If you remember, equipment is a unit cost above $2,000, supplies below. Student support services, such as for our district to have nursing services and guidance and library. And then the other is sort of a catch-all of the other. And that brings us to the total of 100%. Okay, where does the money go for what we are increasing the budget? So this is just based on the increase of the budget. So contractual salaries alone account for $353,000 of the increase. And then health benefits account for $602. So if you add those two things together, you're at $955. Remember, the tax levy didn't go up more than $600,000. So as you can see, those two things ate up more than the lion's share. And so therefore, everything else sort of had to contract a little bit. Or we had to see revenue sources to counteract those two very large increases. Okay, what are those large increases? What's the net effect? The net effect is that the tax levy is increasing from 39.6 just about to a little over 40 million. The increase is $599,000 basically, or 1.51, which correlates to an annual increase of $4 per 100,000 of assessed value. If you've been watching these presentations through the years, we used to present this information in a little bit of a more difficult way to comprehend. We would base it on the average assessed value. So last year, the average assessed value was $733,000. This year, it's $744,000. And we would talk about the net effect of the change on those two figures. It's probably easier if you're sitting here knowing what your home's approximate value is. It's probably easier for you to multiply per 100,000 by $4 and have an idea of what the effect of this would be on your tax levy. On the average base home, it would be $30 a year. Does anybody have any other questions?